Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast. And folks, I am so excited for what's about to come. That's right. We have another interview in our Traits of a Winner series. We're talking seeking mastery because we know that winners seek mastery. And folks, we've got an interview for you that is, how else do I say this? Out of this world. I know it's going to be, I can say that in advance. And of course, I have to make the bad dad joke by starting it off with saying this is going to be out of this world. Because ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you, and I'm going to have him do most of the introduction, but I want to introduce to you our guest for Seeking Mastery today. And that is Loren Shriver, former astronaut. So yes, literally, we're out of this world today. So Loren, thank you so much for joining us for the Win, Make, Give podcast today.
Pat, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So give everybody an introduction to who you are. I've got this bio in front of me, but it's going to sound so much more exciting coming from you and highlighting the things you want to mention. Loren, introduce yourself to our crew.
Well, again, Loren Shriver. I started off on a farm in rural Iowa and went through high school there and then right into the Air Force active duty. Went to the Air Force Academy and majored in aeronautical engineering. From there on to Purdue University for a master's in aero and astronautical engineering. And when that was all done, kind of the first phase of my professional career, if you will, went back to Iowa and got married to my high school sweetheart. And we've been over 53 years now together as married folks. And I knew her probably at least 10 years prior to that. So we go back a long ways together and we're having a ball in life, kind of living the dream there. After marriage, finally went down to Oklahoma and attended Air Force pilot training. That takes about a year, roughly. And if you want to start talking about wins and so forth connected with a career, the Air Force Academy, Purdue, pilot training, getting married, all of those are what I consider to be big wins along the way. But it doesn't really stop there because after pilot training, I was an instructor pilot for about 5 years, I guess. And then it was off to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, if you will, in the F-4, a different airplane. I had to check out in Florida for that. And each one of these steps is a step in the progression toward becoming an astronaut. So I hope I'm not boring people by including a lot of detail there, but after Vietnam, I spent about 11 months, a little over 11 months there. Mostly we were stationed in Thailand. That's where a lot of the Air Force airplanes were. While I was there, I applied to Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base in California and was accepted there. So when I came back, I went to Omaha, picked up my family, which had grown by one while I was in Thailand, and then on out to Edwards Air Force Base in the high desert of California, and proceeded to spend the next year at Test Pilot School, and then kind of another win, if you will, and then on to work as a test pilot. And I haven't said anything about astronauts or whatever yet. I'll wait a little bit and we can talk more about that. But after test pilot school and working as a test pilot for a little over 2 years, 2.5, I guess, NASA did put out its call for the first class of dedicated space shuttle astronauts. And I, along with a few thousand other guys, I guess, considered myself to be in a position to submit an application, so I did. And that turned out to be a huge win, of course, because uh, they accepted me, and off we went into that world. But basically, now to finish off the introduction, I'm sort of semi-retired after about 50 years of various things taking place. I say semi-retired, working with the American Legion a lot here in town, and a couple of other uh, fun things like an aviation club and that sort of thing. And so it's been a nice time, but it's been keeping me a little bit busy too. So
That's
that's
Loren. I mean, and folks, you're hearing Loren give this bio of himself, and of course, he's giving you some. I mean, he's still not even half of what I've got written up here on him. We're going to touch on some of that, Loren. Yet you said so many things in there that were worth even looking back at before we even get into space. But let me go back to you mentioned 53 years with your high school sweetheart. I mean, want to talk about a win? That's amazing. Loren, give our audience the one tip for all the men listening. All right, for all the men listening, because that's who you can speak to. 53 years, how do we do it?
well, I think that one of the key things for us was I had my stuff I was doing, and she had her stuff that she was doing. We lived together. We had a great family together, but we didn't necessarily demand that each other get overly involved in the other one's line of work. She was a registered nurse starting off, got started in the OBGYN area and kept going there. Finally became a midwife I was training to fly my first space shuttle flight when she did that. And she spent then 25, 30 years as a certified nurse midwife, delivering probably more babies herself than most OBGYN doctors do during their career. And that may sound like a bold statement
Amazing.
to make, but she worked in hospital settings, typically in county or regional hospital systems. And it wasn't every time she went to work for 12-hour shifts. And it wasn't if she was going to deliver her baby, it was just how many she would deliver during that 12-hour shift. Sometimes it would be one.
Maybe we should be talking to her.
Yeah, no kidding. But
She definitely learned how to master baby delivery.
Yeah, she did a lot of that and was very good at it, and really enjoyed it. So I think we both really enjoyed what we were doing.
Awesome.
We interfaced with each other at the critical times, of course, and we supported each other and supported the family, and it has worked out beautifully.
There you go. All right, gang. So you're hearing, if you're paying any attention right now, you're hearing to a man who can tell you 53 years married to his high school sweetheart, including 10 years of knowing each other before the marriage even happens. He's giving you the tips on how to make it happen and successful for even you. All right. Now, I heard two roles in there that you talked about. First of all, thank you for your service. I heard two jobs you mentioned in there. You were an instructor pilot at one point, and you were a test pilot at one point. Now, I just want to clarify that I understand the difference here. An instructor pilot in the sense that you were teaching other pilots, and a test pilot as in, well, you were flying new planes to make sure that they worked?
That's absolutely correct. Spent about 4.5, 5 years as an instructor. This was during the high volume Vietnam days when the pilot training pipeline was crammed full of people, and it was never a dull moment in any of those years. Going out to Edwards and becoming a test pilot was just another version of that, but it's different flying because you are testing new airplanes, and your job is to make sure that that airplane ends up being something that one of those newly graduated pilots that I had as an instructor could turn around and within a few months be checked out in an airplane that was going to fly safely for that person.
Okay, so Loren, let me ask you this. You got a rookie learning how to fly that you're teaching how to fly that you're in the plane with. You got a plane that's never been flown before that you're flying to make sure that it works. Which one's scarier?
Well, there are moments in each case where it's pretty scary when you get new student pilots and you get into the formation flying phase, especially when we start in with 4 airplane formations, and they're not really sure how this formation thing works just yet. And you're trying to teach them how to fly with about 3 or 4 feet of wingtip clearance. It's a pretty good, I call it pucker factor there. And you can also have those moments as a test pilot as well. I had one project as a test pilot.
I'm sure you can, and I'm sure that pucker factor also came into play becoming an astronaut as well, which we're looking forward to hearing more about. Now, give me the years. You're talking about you kind of were in the training for all this and Vietnam and before the shuttle and all that. But you seem to know, even when you were back in school, by the things you were studying, that you wanted the opportunities of flight and space. When was it that you graduated from college? How long ago was that? I mean, it was before we were on the moon.
I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1967. So the buildup toward the moon missions was happening then. Of course, the first one, 1969. So it was after I graduated from the Air Force Academy, and even after I graduated from Purdue with a master's degree, and was on into pilot training then when that was happening. I had actually finished pilot training and has gone to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, in the Panhandle of Florida, and was checking out as a brand new instructor pilot when they landed on the moon the first time. My first daughter was born on July 15th. So she's basically 4 or 5 days old during that first landing. And so we're just kind of sitting there taking it all in and pretending to be new parents.
So your life really changed within a span of 5 days again, right there. We actually landed on the moon and you became a father.
Right. Yes, that's correct.
Wow. All right. So now let's go way, way, way back. Okay. Now, when we're kids, I don't want to speak for everybody out there, but I know that many, many, many kids at some point dream of being an astronaut. We dream of going into space. We dream of what all that looks like. And heck, the next generation that's going to be listening to this podcast, they might be doing it the way Elon Musk is going for us and taking us all into space. Yet, what was it like? Were you a kid that was playing with rocket ships and thinking about space when you were a kid, or was it somewhere along the way? What gave you this bug, Loren?
It was more a case of along the way. When I was in elementary school, we did not have a human spaceflight program yet. I think people were thinking about it and they were getting ready for it, but it wasn't really there yet. And so, we had the Buck Rogers cartoon and comic books and things like that, but we had no real active role models until later on when I was in high school. Then then things were getting a lot more serious about going into space and working toward a moon landing. Some of the time I look back and I thought, the tests that they were doing at the time, actually 50% of the time it seemed like they didn't work out very well. And luckily we got past that in due time and had a bunch of successes. But the thing that helped me, I think, was my intense desire to fly airplanes. And I think that happened around intermediate school age. And I think that provided a lot of motivation and direction to my high school years and my college years. I was always pretty good at the technical stuff in school. And so it just kind of came naturally that I would fall into that and start planning how I was going to become a pilot, because that's the thing I really wanted to do first. And the astronaut part was not even a reality until quite a bit later, even though as I was going through the earlier years of my career, there were missions on the way to landing on the moon. And certainly that got my attention, yes.
I would definitely think so, especially being a pilot at that time and thinking about all that excitement that goes on this. All right, so you've talked to us a little bit about the path you took to becoming an astronaut. You even mentioned some of the wins along the way, from the graduating and from surviving as an instructor pilot and a test pilot, 53 years of marriage and all of that. I did the math, 386 hours in space. That's more than 16 days you spent in outer space. So, Loren, I got to ask, because if I don't, Bob and Ben will look at me and ask why I didn't ask them. Do aliens really exist? I mean, you were up there.
Yeah, well, I have to admit that I did not see any aliens. You're not alone in asking that question, by the way. It comes up almost every presentation I give around the country. Not to belabor it, but the first thing I say is, well, what is your definition of an alien? And that's pretty crucial, because when somebody says, did you ever see any aliens? To me, that means it's a visitor from some far off place. It's not some of these little funnies that they see on radar screens and that sort of thing, which are, some of them are explained later on anyway, as soon as people quiet down and stop talking about it. But I have to admit that being visited by a real alien from another galaxy or another far out star or something, solar system, I don't place a lot of faith in that, because of the if you believe in the Big Bang, why then the start in the universe of us and other beings or forms of life ought to be about on the same timetable. And here we've been around for several billion years, and we've gotten as far as the moon away from the Earth. We may get to Mars one of these days, but to me, visiting Mars does not constitute being a real alien. It's just, several million miles away, but to me, it doesn't count. You got to be from some exotic place in the universe to qualify as an alien. And I just don't think that the developmental time for somebody else is that far ahead of us that they'll. First of all, you got to be interested in this little blue planet. Otherwise, you wouldn't come here anyway.
Well, there you go. I'm glad to know there aren't forces up there waiting to attack at a moment's notice. And if you didn't see anything up there, I'm sure we're all good about it. So here's the thing, we're talking about traits of a winner, and we're talking about winning, and you've shared some things, and we're going to keep going on it. Yet we're specifically focused on seeking mastery. And I got to imagine astronauts have to master what they're doing. It's not like you can pull over to the side of the road if the space shuttle breaks down and have somebody come by and tow you or fix it that's an expert at it and stuff like that. What does it look like to seek mastery in regards to, well, being an astronaut? What does that look like? Are there hours and hours of training and practice? And talk to us a little bit about seeking mastery, Loren.
Well, everything I've mentioned along the way on the road to becoming an astronaut is a form of becoming a master at the things that will qualify you or appeal to a selection board who is selecting astronauts to say, hey, this guy or this girl is really, they're really into what they're doing. They have indeed risen to the top level of performance on research, flying, whatever you want to call it. And so all of that along the way, I think, is a form of reaching the mastery. But once we got to Houston and started training to become space flyers, it like went on steroids after that. And the amount of training that you get in various areas is designed to expose you to some new stuff and reinforce what you already may be quite familiar with. For example, we had classes in geology, space physics, even a little bit of medicine and dentistry, because you can't always carry or have a doctor or a dentist on your crew. So those people who are there need to know a little bit about that. You know, I never pictured myself getting into medicine, but you know, all of that kind of training, especially the geology, was really interesting. Once we got into space, and you have a chance to look back at the Earth as you orbit around. The space shuttle was limited to low Earth orbit in the functions that it could do. And hopefully we'll get away from that one of these years as we head toward Mars and back to the moon, of course. But it's everything they did was designed to give you more experience and a more broad outlook on what you were going to experience than what you had already. And they did a good job of it. They really did.
So that's interesting. So to really be a master at what you became an astronaut, you learned multiple different fields of industry you never even considered needing to know so that you could truly master the one area and then therefore be ready to take care of other things, whether it was repair, whether it was medicine for one of your teammates up in space when something happened, whatever it was, you were trained in everything.
We had some training in a lot of things, enough so that we could ask questions of geologists on the ground and say, "Hey, I'm seeing this. What do you think this thing is, or what am I looking at?" And able to communicate with them a bit better than if you had not been exposed. Of course, the real mastery then came once you were assigned to a crew. And as a person with a pilot background, I was assigned to either be the pilot, which is the right seat of the airplane, or the commander, which is the left seat. And so the amount of training that was done specifically to get those two positions up to full speed on what you should expect and what you were going to see, both in a normal ascent and then with all kinds of problems inserted into the launch phase or the reentry phase. That covers hours and hours and hours. And you have this training team out in the control room of the simulator. Just, you swear they're sitting out there, rubbing their hands together, and boy, are we going to get them this time. They're not going to recognize anything we do. And they just throw the kitchen sink at you in order to expose you to the different potential things that could go wrong in the space shuttle during launch and entry and on orbit as well.
Wow. Sure. So, 386 hours in space sounds like we're easily adding a zero, if not two zeros to that, of the number of hours of training before we've been able to get there.
Yes, I would say usually you were assigned to a crew at least a year in advance, and wow. You started training both in things that you expected to be able to do, launch and entry, but you also did specific training for the primary mission and secondary missions that you had that you were going to have during the conduct of the mission. So hours and hours.
So
and
Loren,
hours.
Wow. Okay. So when we talk to other winners that we've had the chance to talk to or interview or research even on our own, one of the things we hear as a common thread is the team around them, that they've assembled this amazing team or become a part of an amazing team. Talk a minute about the importance of teammates, because you don't go into space on your own. Now, how reliant are you on your teammates, or is it everyone has their job and you're going to be a master of this and I'm going to be a master of that? Talk about what does that look like? You said it's a year you get assigned your crew. How important is that crew, and how important does that crew become to a successful mission?
Well, I think I would describe it this way. Flying into space is one huge, huge team effort. And there are different levels of teams within the overall flying in space team. The first one you've mentioned, we've talked a little bit about, and that's being assigned to the crew. Typically, our crews were 5 to 7 people on the space shuttle. And as the commander, you were kind of responsible for divvying up the various tasks that you expected to happen. Some people were assigned to a crew because they had certain background, and so it was natural that they would then be responsible for that area. So there's individual areas of responsibility, and that's top-notch responsibility. And then there's what it takes for the crew working together to make the whole mission a success. And that's something that gels together over that year or more of training together. You just can't stress enough how linked together, how much you start almost knowing what the other person is thinking. That's a little bit maybe far-fetched, but actually you kind of get there. And you need to have that sort of thing to be able to totally rely on each other doing what would be expected of them to react to an emergency on ascent, especially when the time is so critical and the options on what to do are fairly limited in nature, but very important to be able to do them quickly. And then beyond the crew, then you've got
such a powerful team.
Yeah, beyond the crew, you've got all of the people on the ground, and there are thousands of people that are involved in every space shuttle mission or every space mission today to the International Space Station. And certainly when we get ready to go back to the moon and on to Mars, there'll be thousands of people involved in those efforts as well. The training team I mentioned, they're responsible to get you trained to peak performance. The payload team, which teaches you about how to operate the payload that you've got to make sure you don't mess something up and do more harm than good. Their responsibility. The ground control team covers several shifts of people, and each one of those people is an expert. You talk about a win there. Those people are so highly trained in what they do that usually, because there are a lot more of them and they do it all the time, they see the issues first and can help guide you then in how to deal with something that's happening as you're in a critical phase of flight. And then, it's all the teams involved in building the hardware, putting the hardware together down in Florida, moving it to the launch pad, testing the engines, testing everything to the nth degree, so that they're absolutely positive that things are going to work normally when you crew marches out there and goes up on the launch pad to get strapped into the spacecraft and ready to launch. It's almost a mind-boggling effort from thousands of people to get you there.
Loren, what I'm hearing right now is I am hearing a man who's an astronaut, a man with a ton of medals. I'm going to read them shortly, but a man who's an astronaut with a ton of medals who has every reason to strut. And meanwhile, I hear such a humble man who's filled with gratitude for all of those people, because I ask you about your team in space and you make sure not to miss a single team that has helped to create the space program and keep the space program moving in the right direction. So we definitely found a guy worth talking to today. I want to ask you about these medals. I got a list and I got to read them. So forgive me, everybody, get comfortable for a second, because this gentleman that we're talking to, he didn't just fly a few airplanes and stuff. And hopefully I'll get them all right here, Loren. The United States Air Force Distinguished Flying Cross, the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Air Force Meritorious Service Medal, the Air Force Commendation Medal, NASA Distinguished Service Medal, the NASA Outstanding Leadership Medal, and 3 times the NASA Space Flight Medal. Loren, that's a lot of medals that you have been awarded. Give me a story behind one of them. Give me a win behind one of those medals that just stands out in your mind.
Well, Chad, I'll continue being the modest person that I think I am. Many of those medals are for doing the job that you were supposed to do in the first place and doing it well. So, if you're with it and you're motivated and you work hard, you're going to get some of those medals. Now, the space flight medals and that sort of thing, yeah, that came after a huge amount of work to get accomplished those things that I told you about early on when we were talking about the progression of my career. The Distinguished Flying Cross is the highest of those medals. Basically, that came from the assignment to be an astronaut and then fly in the space shuttle 3 different times, ascent and entry. That is a pretty amazing, I guess, accomplishment in the eyes of people who are in aviation and that sort of thing. So that's more of why the DFC is there rather than some heroism in combat or something like that. That didn't happen.
I don't know. I think it's all heroism in combat. You flying into space, forget all the other flying you did as well. Let me just ask about that when it comes to it. you've flown 3 missions. Are you, and I don't know my space shuttle lore as well as maybe I should, are you one of the most frequent space shuttle mission flyers then?
Actually, no. We had I don't know 4 or 5 people who flew like 6 missions. I think one even 7 missions.
Wow.
It's one of those things where it's so neat and so interesting to go do it. On the other hand, it's not without risk. And I mentioned, I'm trying to remain cognizant of my family and the needs of the family as well. Some of that input was made more to my wife than to me. Um, little comments to her like, "When's Dad going to think about doing something different?" And so depending on your point of view, you can really revel in the accomplishment and the experience of flying in space. On the other hand, with the risk involved, there's some other things that need to be thought about as well. So when I finished the third mission,
Sure.
I was beginning to have those thoughts about, well, what does one do after flying in space? And the opportunity came not too long after that to get involved in the program management of the space shuttle program. So that's what I ended up doing after the third flight. And that's where the white hair came from.
Very good. All right. So, Loren, you've mentioned risk a few times in there, and of course, we all remember the tragedy of the Challenger. So we know that there's risk. I want to use an expression you used earlier, which was the pucker factor.
Yes.
So give us a story that, NASA hasn't classified, that you're not allowed to tell us or something. Give us one of those pucker factor moments that happened on one of your space missions.
I would have to say the first exposure to that was the very first launch that I made in the space shuttle. We fighter pilots tend to be a little bit boisterous at time, and we believe that I get asked the question all the time: Were you afraid when you were getting ready to launch in the space shuttle? I said, fighter pilots don't get afraid; they become apprehensive, and so the we would listen to the crews that had launched on missions before us. They would come back and give us debriefings of the various phases of flight. And so, in typical fashion, when it came time to talk about the launch and what it felt like and all that, they would just say things like, "Oh, the first stage is really dynamic. It does some vibrating and shaking back and forth." And then they'd move on. Well, I tell you, I always prided myself in thinking that I had complete control over the aircraft I was flying. I could make it do whatever it was supposed to do, whatever I wanted it to do. But along came the first space shuttle launch, and when at T0, when the computers sends the signal for the hold down bolt mechanism to explode and let you free from the tower. It's more than dynamic. It's almost a violent ride for the first several seconds that you lift off from the launch pad. You have about 7.3 million pounds of thrust pushing on about 4.5 million pounds of structure that's trying to go into space, at least starting. The whole thing is not going to go to space, but that's the way it works. But that was such a dynamic ride and so much shaking and vibration. And then the further into ascent you get, the higher the G loading, front to back G loading. becomes, and you find it almost impossible to move except in very small motions. If you really wanted to move your head and look up at the overhead panels, which had engine switches and computer switches on them, you reached back with both hands and grabbed your helmet and did this phenomenal sit-up motion, and then used your arms to move your head and then let go. And then you're kind of stuck in that position while you do whatever overhead that you might. And then you have to do the same thing in reverse to come back. That kind of
Wow.
opens your eyes the first time, because you just don't experience. You can pull high G loads in a fighter airplane, but it's in top down. You become used to that. This prevented you from moving, kind of like a 400-pound gorilla sitting on your chest, and you just can't wait until main engine cutoff so that gorilla would get off your chest and you can breathe normally again.
Loren, you tell it so well. I'm over here puckering myself hearing the story through all of that. Pretty amazing stuff that you guys get to experience. So I'm a big movie buff, so I've got to just ask this question for my own personal satisfaction. None of these celebrities have been to space. None of these directors have been to space. Which movie has got it closest to accurate? If I'm going to want to learn about space or pretend or feel, I mean, I'm sure I'm not watching Star Wars, even though that's real. I mean, I know that's real. Yet, what movie is it that I should be watching that's going to give me the most real experience?
I thought Apollo 13 did a real good job of the realism, a lot more realism than most other space-related movies that I've seen, both in depiction of zero G and things floating in the cockpit. There's enough of that to get that feel. And the other realistic part of Apollo 13 was the way the ground responded to help the crew get through the blowing off of the one side of the spacecraft, essentially, and
Right.
everything they had to do to get the spacecraft in a condition where it could actually come back, go out, circle around the moon, and head back before everybody inside froze to death or whatever. And it was a real problem. But when the guy walks in the room with a basket full of stuff and dumps it on the table and says, "This is what we have to work with," that's pretty real. So.
And I mean, it's a great movie. I mean, you bring a great movie to attention with that. I mean, do you really remember the Apollo 13 like experience?
I remember hearing about it and reading about it and watching TV about it, as it was happening. But having not been directly involved in the space program yet, it was, it lacked some realism for me in the fact that I had no concept of what they were going through until later on.
Yeah, and now you can look back and absolutely understand. Loren, what a journey it has been with you on winning, whether it's from 53 years of marriage to 3 different times in space, over 16 days up there, and your journey in between. Here at Win Make Give, we want to thank you for taking your time and joining us. And in season 2, while we're focusing on winners, one of the things that we're living up to is the give of Win Make Give. And we want to make a donation to a charity on your behalf. So for the number of listens we can get for the first 30 days on this. So folks, share this episode. Let everybody else hear Loren's story as well. Laugh along with us. Experience the pucker factor of going into space. Loren, for every listen we get, we're going to be able to make a donation to a charity. And I know you mentioned them earlier in the episode that you're working with them today. What charity is it we're going to be making the donation to?
Since I am working with them right now, the American Legion Post 119 here in Estes Park, Colorado, would be my choice of a charity to donate to. So,
And Loren, it'll be our pleasure to donate to them on your behalf. So
thank you very much.
We really, really, really appreciate the time you've shared with us. We appreciate what you've done for your service with our country. We appreciate what you've done for our service with the NASA program and things that you've been able to do in your time in space, and sharing that with us and taking a little chunk out of that today. Folks, join us in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/win-make-give, so we can continue the conversation after the episodes air. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss a single episode and opportunities to hear interviews like this with people like Loren. And until our next episode, as always, do good,